podcasting from sunny Phoenix, Arizona. Welcome to Tips for Tour Operators, your podcast for growth hacks, marketing tips, and actionable insights from leading experts in the tourism industry.
Hello, tour operators. I'm Adam Arkfeld, owner of Outdoor Venture Marketing, and your host on the Tips for Tour Operator podcast. Today, we're going to be talking to Douglas Quinby, one of the co-founders of Arival, the tour operators annual conference that happens in Las Vegas in the fall. He is also a senior vice president of research at Phocuswright, which is the industry's leading research resource for tours, activities, and everything related to travel nationally and globally. Today's conversation goes a little bit more high level. We're going to talk about how to make your tour authentic for international visitors. We're going to talk about the various different distribution channels that you have as a tour operator. We're also going to talk about demand-based and variable-based pricing that is starting to emerge in the tour field that already exists in industries like hospitality. So without further ado, here is the conversation and interview with Douglas Quinby. Douglas, thanks for joining us. To get started, why don't you talk to us a little bit about your background with Arival and Phocuswright and tell us how the event came to be and what you do at Phocuswright.
Oh, great. Well, thanks, Adam, for inviting me to join the podcast. Really excited. This whole, the sector of tours and activities and attractions, all the things that travelers do in destinations, been kind of a little bit of a personal and work, obsession of mine over the past several years. So I've been in travel and tourism for about 2 decades now. And the last decade I've worked at Phocuswright, which is a leading travel industry research and events company. And I've been a lead in the research team there for several years. And one of the areas that I saw a really big opportunity for, this is going back, now 2010, when we started to see the growth of smartphones and iPhones and all of this happening. I really saw this incredible future potential for that in-destination experience for travelers. And there's obvious potential for how this little supercomputer now that we're all carrying in the back of our pockets is going to completely transform how travelers find and book and just think about what they're going to do in destination. So we actually began our research at Phocuswright in this category. 2010, we released a report called When They Get There and Why They Go, where we looked at the entire category in the US. At the time, we sized the market at about $27 or $28 billion. And this was, in the thick of a recession, right? Or in the heels of a recession, I should say. It's still a huge market. And we also identified almost 40 different industry categories within like tours and activities and attractions. So you think about it, like we built out this whole kind of schema or like taxonomy to define the category, but like it's everything from, a foodie tour, a walking tour, a helicopter tour, a scuba diving tour, to Disney World, right? Or Universal Studios, right? Or something so completely different, but so big. And all of these things are like in this one crazy category called tours and activities. And we just saw this incredible opportunity there. So we continued to research and do more work. And then over the last couple of years, it occurred to me going to one of my jobs at Phocuswright is to go around to conferences and kind of speak and share our research and insights. And I'd always observed at travel industry conferences that, basically they spend all their time talking about airlines and hotels, right? So basically transportation and sleeping quarters. But that's not really why people travel, right? They travel because they want to see the Eiffel Tower or they want to experience, some type of incredible cuisine or experience or see something they've never seen before. So it's all of that stuff that really drives and inspires travel, but there was no event or no forum to bring this incredibly diverse community of companies together and also to talk about the incredible changes that the sector is going through around digital and technology and marketing and changing consumer behavior. And Well, I could go on and on and on. So that was really the inspiration for Arival last year, which we launched in October in Las Vegas, and we were really, I mean, frankly, it was quite humbling to see the incredible response and to see this incredible community. We had more than 550 people come together, and so we're just kind of overjoyed and a bit kind of dumbstruck by it, and we're just committed to creating something great for this sector and to making it even bigger and better in 2018.
Yeah, that's great. And we were there last year, and it was really an incredible event. Great speakers, just a lot of
thanks.
engagement.
Well,
and
please come back.
Yeah, we'll be there for sure. And this will be coming out probably in April, so registration will be open. It's already open actually right now. We're in early March, but so anyone listening, check that out, and we'll talk more about how to get in touch with you and find that event at the end of the podcast. So to get started, why don't you tell me a little bit about how you define tours and activities, because that was a little bit of a topic of conversation when we spoke before. So let's talk about the definition so people listening have some context as to what we're talking about as we continue the conversation.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think probably the easiest way to define it is anything that a traveler does in destination outside of shopping and dining. So we think of it broadly in kind of four, or maybe I should say five key categories. So one is tours, but within tours, you've got you've got literally, I mean, scores of different types of companies and experiences, right? So it could be a winery tour, it could be a big bus, sightseeing tour, a hop on, hop off. It could be a helicopter tour. It could be, there's so many different things, water, land, or sea, right? Or by foot, right? There's so many different options and so many different types of cultural experiences. So tour is certainly one. Attractions is another big one, and even within attractions, it's extremely varied. So an attraction would basically, I think, at a very simple way to think about it is a ticketed, say a ticketed free sale type of experience. So you buy a ticket and you get access to something. So Disney World or Disneyland or Universal Studios or a museum, the Met in New York or MoMA or the Louvre in Paris. So an attraction that you go in. Now you could also say attractions. There are many attractions that are not ticketed, and they're basically free. Like anyone can walk up to the Eiffel Tower. So I would also consider that an attraction, but that's just unpaid, and that's also something that we've tracked in our research. Now, where that attractions gets kind of really interesting and complex is, okay, I was actually discussing this with a really fantastic woman in the tours and the attractions world. So for example, in New York City, you have and in Amsterdam, you have some of the greatest kind of cities for museums and art and culture, right? Like you've got the Rijksmuseum and the home of incredible artists in Amsterdam, and then you've got MoMA and the Met and the Whitney and all these incredible museums in New York. Now you also have in New York and Amsterdam 2 sex museums, and you pay a ticket or you can go right in. So those are also attractions. So you have this. It's just a really interesting kind of mix of different types of businesses or monuments, I guess you could say, that comprise attractions. So another is activities. And activities is basically, we think of this as something that is participatory. So for example, doing a yoga class or doing a zip line, a zip line activity at a zip line kind of tour company or attraction. So something that is you're physically kind of participating in. And that can also just include things like, golf, golf tee time, or, reserving some time at a local tennis club, right, to play some tennis or something like that. Rentals is another big one. If you rent gear or rent a bike or rent scuba gear or snorkeling gear at a beach. So activities and it's also a really interesting and very complex one, because that's a sector where you've got tons and tons of really small businesses. And I think it's those companies in particular, as well as a lot of small companies, that I think are most underserved by the broader travel industry and by industry services like media and conferences, and that to really help them better their business and to plug into the broader industry. The fourth one is events. And so this is basically performing arts or sporting events. So if you go pick up see a baseball game or a basketball game when you're traveling in a city, or maybe you go see an orchestra, or you go to a Broadway play, or you see the Blue Man Group, that would be it is a specific kind of ticketed but also a scheduled event with a finite number of tickets. Then you also have experiences like a luau in Hawaii, so where it's kind of a tour, but it's also an event. So is that a tour or an event? So that's a question for I don't know, a philosopher to contemplate. And the last category, the fifth, of course, is ground transportation, which we think of as prearranged ground transportation. So where you're getting a shuttle, or you're getting a kind of a bus transfer, or a prearranged car or limo to get you from one place to another. And that's really that is a big part of the sector, kind of getting around in destination as well. So those are the 5 key categories that we include within this world of tours, activities, and attractions.
Great. So as it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as it even maybe relates to Arival, if you are a tour company, an attraction, you do activities, events, or ground transportation, those would all be candidates for the Arival event, because that's really geared towards tours and activities. Those are the 5.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. So basically, if you offer something in destination, and I think really, for that matter, if you are in the shopping sector and you specifically target travelers in destination as opposed to local residents, there are certain organizations, like even Macy's in New York, for example, has a tourism marketing department. So there are certain organizations where you are looking to reach travelers in destination, where you are looking to connect with companies that help you find those travelers in destination. I think then our mission is to make sure we've got something to help you with your business.
Perfect. Today we're going to talk about some categories that are a little bit some topics that are a little bit more global. So some of our conversations on the podcast are do these very specific things, and but today, because of your background with the research firm and Arival, we're going to talk a little bit bigger picture, and really we're going to be talking about local authenticity, distribution, pricing, globalization, and if we have time at the end, maybe a couple other things. So to start off, let's talk about local authenticity, and I really like this category because you brought up Airbnb, and this was also a discussion at Arival last year about what they're looking for, the idea of authenticity, and how you take your tour to the next level. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, the move by Airbnb into the tours and really into the tours and activities sector, and really trying to redefine it in a lot of ways, has caused quite a bit of it's created a whole new conversation, I think, within the industry, which is, I think, a really great one. There have been several companies over the years, several startups, that have tried to create a kind of a network, a kind of connect with the local in-destination type of experience. They tried to basically create an Airbnb for tours and activities, or an Uber for tours and activities, or something like that. But the challenge with these companies is how do you scale, right? So how do you get demand? So while there have been a number of really interesting companies, and some are continuing to do it and are doing fairly well, there's that fundamental challenge. And so it never really became an issue until a company that already had loads and loads of demand on its marketplace suddenly step into this space. And I know that the company Airbnb, they've gotten, I think, a lot of criticism from different quarters about this move. They've gotten criticism from the financial community because of the potential financial impact and the risk. They've gotten criticism from local tour and activity suppliers and others because of some of the the issues around, like, well, are these experienced hosts, are they licensed tour guides? Like, what's is this, how can they compete with me if I've got to have all of this overhead around our legal issues and licensing and so forth.
And are they licensed tour guides, or are they posting a number of tours in where the tour guides are not licensed? Is that a major problem?
I don't believe. I think it varies. I think you do have some actual tour companies that are listing experiences, and it is with professional tour guides or tour companies. And I think in other cases, it's not, and it's simply individuals that may have a particular skill or specialty. And a lot of the experiences aren't really tours per se. In fact, I met a really interesting guy in Paris who does basically every Sunday he plays some pickup soccer with some of his friends, and he's also a host on Airbnb, and so he posted that as an experience. So if you're visiting Paris and you like to play soccer, come hang out with me and my friends. We'll play soccer with you, and then we'll go for a beer afterwards. And I think he charges like 25 or 30 euros, and I think he includes a beer. And which is, it's kind of interesting. Like, sometimes you want to go to a city, and yes, you want to go to the Louvre and do a tourist thing. But like, if you really love to play soccer, that would be kind of fun, right? Just to be able to, like, who could just, as an American, you can go to Paris and just walk into a park and start playing soccer with some people. I think that would be, for most people, that would be kind of awkward, right? A little uncomfortable. So I think it's an interesting idea. And I really, for all of the criticism Airbnb has endured, I just have to, tip my hat, because it's an enormous risk. I mean, they have a huge business, and they have invested a great deal to try to create something entirely new. And they've now put experiences front and center on their website and in their app. And so they're really, they're pushing it in a way that I think most companies, they wouldn't take those types of big risks. So I'm a big admirer of what they're doing and what they're trying to accomplish. And I do believe that they could do a better job of connecting with the industry, and I would say being kind of better, partners. And I think they are really trying, very hard, and they are learning and doing more. And I think just the fact that, we had Emma Rodden from the experiences team speak at Arival last year, and do her very best to address a lot of the questions that the audience came up with. I think it shows that they're very serious about the sector and want to do more.
Now, if you're a tour operator listening to this and you want to leverage that platform and their experiences, what are some of the things that you would recommend people keep in mind? If I remember correctly, I thought I remember a little conversation around the authenticity of experiences. So maybe if you're doing something like an ATV tour, it sounds like that's not enough for them to put on their website. It has to be, an ATV tour with a soccer star, with, some rare cheese, at sunset. What are some recommendations you would give to tour operators that want to take advantage of that platform as it's growing, because it's new?
Yeah, it's new, but it is. There have been some reports out and some indications from the company that it's growing, very quickly. And look, they have a lot of demand. By our research, by our estimates, Airbnb now globally is the fourth largest online travel company in the world. So you've got the Priceline Group. Well, now it's Booking Holdings, Expedia, Ctrip, which is the big online travel agency in China, and then Airbnb is number 4 by total travel sold, or total the value of all travel sold. So I think any tour company that believes they have a unique and authentic local type of product, that they should really kind of look at the platform as a potential distribution channel. So I think the general message we've heard from Airbnb with the tours and experiences product, as we have with accommodation, is what they want is to create something that is kind of unique, that is distinct. It's not cookie cutter. So generally the message is, yeah, B&Bs are welcome. Independent hotels they've just recently opened up their accommodations business to independent hotels. But I would bet that we're not going to see, for example, every 4,000 Marriott or Sheraton properties suddenly loaded up into Airbnb within the next couple of years, right? They really want each experience, each property to have something unique and local. And I think you could apply the same to a certain degree with the experiences business. And I asked Emma pretty pointedly on stage, like, what would be an example of something, like if you're a tour company or an activity provider in the audience, who can play, right? Who can play on Airbnb? And, she said pretty plainly, and this is something they've been consistent about, is it kind of a mass market or high volume, very common kind of bus tour around the city, or a hop on, hop off? Probably not. But if you are a small company and you do kind of a local walking tour of a museum, or in a neighborhood that's a little bit different, or you do something very kind of authentic or local type of experience, then there's definitely something that they would look at.
Great. Well, this conversation kind of leads into our next topic about distribution, and Airbnb being one of the channels for distribution. Tell us, talk about distribution and how, what the common understanding of the landscape looks like, and maybe what are some areas that people aren't thinking about, or just what you're seeing from the research perspective as it relates to the distribution landscape.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question, because this is one of the things that we spend a lot of time looking at this through our work at Phocuswright, and I think it's so important for the tour and activity and attraction community today, because what we see is that a lot of these companies, the owners, the founders, these are small businesses, and these are people who are passionate about a particular thing that they love to do. If they run a kayaking tour, they want to be out, in the water, right, or on the ocean, right, running those tours, right. They don't want to be answering emails and loading things into OTA extranets and all of this stuff. But it's a really important part of the business, and there hasn't been an easy way, I think, for these companies to really understand that landscape. And what's amazing to me is when I go to conferences and I talk to different suppliers and I ask them about their distribution mix and how they think about reaching new customers, often it's a lot of the same few brands that immediately come to mind, like Expedia or Viator and TripAdvisor, and on the online side. And then with certain types of attractions, there's so much that's really done offline, like it's something where the traveler will simply walk up and purchase a ticket, for example, at a lot of amusement parks and museums and so forth. And so there's just that kind of accepted way of doing distribution. So one of the things that I always try to emphasize whenever I'm speaking about this topic and meeting with suppliers is just how incredibly diverse and fragmented the landscape for distribution is. So just to give you a quick data point, so the big online travel companies like Expedia, Viator, TripAdvisor, Get Your Guide, and several others, if you roll all of them up, their entire gross bookings in aggregate accounts for less than 5% of total tour and attractions and activity sales. It's very, very small. Now, I don't want to minimize the importance of these companies by any stretch, because they're also the fastest growing channel. And so they're really important to be on. And I think in a lot of ways, a lot of these companies are really driving the future of how travelers are going to find and book tours and activities. However, it's such a big market. It's so diverse, and there are so many new travelers coming from different countries and booking through different ways that the tour and activity providers really need to to think about, okay, how am I reaching my customers? Am I getting my messaging, my marketing out in front of not just the people who find me, but the people who might be interested, but I'm not reaching because they may not be searching on this particular website. So I think it's really, really important. And so a great example is, if you're in a market where you're, say, maybe interested in acquiring some of the business from China, because we're seeing a lot of growth in the Chinese travel market. This has been widely discussed. So how are you going to go about reaching those, Chinese travelers, right? So Expedia really isn't so big in China. Frankly, Viator and TripAdvisor really aren't either. They have a presence and they're growing and focusing on it. But when you think about China, the really big companies there are some of the big traditional group tour operators and companies like Ctrip, the big online travel agency in China. So how do you begin to work with them, and how do you tap into some of these customers? Or for that matter, how do you even think about, do you really have a good picture of everybody who's coming to your destination? And are you maybe not capturing or tapping into some travelers because you don't have a full picture of the tourism market in your destination? So the one thing I always say, and we had a session on this topic at Arival, and we will, as long as there is an Arival, because I think it's so important, is to work with your local DMO or destination marketing organization. It's so important. If you're not involved, get involved, engage with them. If your DMO is worth their salt, then they should have lots of great data about who is coming to that destination, where they're coming from, when they're coming, when they're booking, really the kinds of things they like to do. And that will give you the picture to help you understand, how do you tap into them? How do you market them? Should you be marketing more aggressively through local hotels? Should you be, do you know, how many people who come to your destination are actually staying in Airbnbs? Maybe you really better be on Airbnb, because it turns out X% of people who come to the city or that city are in an Airbnb or in HomeAway, which is another vacation rental platform. So really understanding the distribution profile and the kind of source markets for your destination is critical to make sure that you're reaching all the customers in your full potential.
And if you're not currently working with your local DMO, what's the best way for someone to find them and start working with them?
Well, so typically the way DMOs work is they are membership organizations, and they're typically public-private partnerships. So there's a mix of revenues through working directly with private industry as well as government dollars. Look, the best way is simply to look online, figure out who it is, and pick up the phone, send emails. Walk right over, right? And just become a nuisance, and also be willing to become a member and build relationships and spend some time. But I tell you that it will be absolutely worth the time. And if you're committed to driving tourism in your destination, every DMO will want your input and your partnership.
Douglas, you said 5% of bookings are done through the major providers.
It's actually a little less, but yeah.
All right, a little less. Now, how does
the major online travel companies?
Yeah. Now, how does the other 95%, broadly speaking, break down? I mean, that's a huge. It's we spend a lot of time talking about 5%, and we always spend a lot of time talking about that 5%. But what's the other piece of the pie?
Well, there's a lot of pieces, and by the way, there's so many differences between those different sectors. So I talked at the beginning about like those 5 categories, and then within each of those categories, there's lots of subcategories. So there's going to be enormous differences in each of those. And so as I walk through these, I want to point out that there's no like one right answer, right, for any individual tour operator. But like in general, so there's certainly provider websites, which are pretty big. So if you're a tour operator or an attraction, booking through your websites is one piece. That's a little bit bigger than OTAs, in part because there are certain types of attractions that have big brands and that drive a lot that drive a lot of that. Then also offline, especially a lot of travelers will not make a decision until they get into destination. And it's simply the nature of the thing, right? So there are some tours and activities and attractions that are, we call them trip drivers. Like, I am taking this trip because I want my kids to go to Disney World, so I'm going to make sure I organize those tickets in advance. Or I am taking this trip because I'm passionate about scuba diving, and so I'm going to arrange my travel around being able to do this particular scuba tour. But most activities, while they're important and part of the trip experience, the traveler doesn't want to have to choose in advance. They don't want to have to commit to, a tour on a particular morning because maybe they don't know if they'll want to sleep in or not, right? So they always want that flexibility, or to go to a museum whenever they want. So a big piece of it is simply, okay, hey, let's go to this museum. Hey, let's go to SeaWorld today. Hey, let's see if there's some room on this tour. That would be fun. And so they'll make those decisions pretty last minute. So there's still a lot that happens in destination. A lot of it is simply calling, in the case of a tour operator, oh, there's space. Okay, fine. I'll go right over, or just simply walking up and purchasing a ticket. A few other things I'd point out too. Destination passes is a really interesting and growing trend. So these are companies like, well, there's, City Pass is one of the biggest and most well-known in the US, but also Leisure Pass. iVenture is a startup, I think, out of Australia. And there are a few others. And so these are basically multi-attraction passes in cities where a traveler can purchase a pass and give them options to go to any one of a number of different attractions over a certain amount of time. And those are increasingly popular. And so I think a tour supplier, or an attraction in particular, should look at a destination pass provider in their market as a potential possibility and see if there is one, and see how they can work with them. And then another one, especially for international inbound travel, is some of the big tour operators. So it's still travelers, especially in Europe, but also in Asia and Latin America, they do still book through traditional travel agencies and some of the big traditional tour operators, and do a lot of group booking and also independent travel. And so companies like JTB in Japan, Hana Tours in Korea, TUI and Thomas Cook in Europe. There's a company called CVC in Brazil. These are big travel companies that organize big package and group travel to the United States and other destinations, and they sell a lot of tickets and a lot of activities.
Yeah, we were actually just talking with a tour operator here locally, and we were talking about some international tourists that will basically be 90% of a local tour's business, just because they're coming in such high volume regularly in areas that local people and even Americans wouldn't normally go. So it's really interesting.
Another one too, we shouldn't leave out, is cruise lines as well, which are huge sellers of activities in port destinations. So if you're in a Caribbean port destination, or in Florida, Mexico, then, cruise lines are just going to be tremendously important to your business. In some cases, could represent almost 100%.
Now, one thing you and I were talking about prior was something that I found really interesting was related to pricing. And you were starting to talk about how pricing is changing within the industry, and demand-based pricing, and how if you have one price all the time, that you may be missing something. And we do marketing, we do paid advertising, and one conversation that we have all the time, probably on almost every kickoff call, is, hey, my Friday, Saturday, and Sunday are totally booked, and how can we get more business, when we're slow? And it's a challenge that we're dealing with constantly. And while this, demand-based pricing doesn't solve that problem, it does help with the situation if demand's really high on the weekends or in Friday or something like that. So can you talk a little bit about how that's changing, and if there are tools or platforms that are employing demand-based pricing that people can start looking into to take advantage of?
Yeah, so demand-based pricing, or let's just even kind of take a step back. So in the tours and activities and attraction space, we are I would say demand-based pricing is barely out of the womb, right? If at all. And there are not a lot of companies that provide a service like this. There is a really interesting company called Diginex that actually, which is beginning to do this. And they actually spoke at a session that we had last year at Arival, specifically on pricing. But just as a little history, so this is something that has now 40 years. It was first developed by American Airlines, I think, in the early 1980s. So you have 38, almost 40 years of history, where it's basically using lots of data to figure out, what is the optimal price that you can sell a particular good at, or in this case, an airline seat. And that's why, there's that kind of classic, the case of two people sitting next to each other on a flight, and they're both sitting in the same, awful seat, and one person paid $200 and one person paid $800. And the two of them find out, and one of them's pretty unhappy, and one of them is, still uncomfortable, but maybe less unhappy, right? So, and this is something that's been played out now in hotels, it's in car rentals, it's in big kind of tour operators, cruise lines. So basically, it's basic principle of what you call kind of like a yield curve, right? So, where as you charge less, you're going to get more people booking. As you charge more, then that's going to slow demand. There's going to be fewer people willing to pay at that price. And if you manage it kind of very carefully, the ideal is that you can get the optimal amount of people at the optimal pricing and generate the most revenue. So there's a saying in the case of hotel. It's called revenue management in the case of the hotel industry. And the saying is, if you are ever at 100% occupancy, then your revenue management isn't right. So you didn't charge enough. So you should never be fully booked, because then you're underpricing your room. So it's very developed. It's very sophisticated in most sectors of travel. It's started to come into the world of vacation rentals and Airbnb. So there's actually a really interesting company called Beyond Pricing that provides these tools to even individual homeowners, like a supplier, right? So if you're a host and you just list your home on Airbnb, maybe a few weekends a year, but you can use their tool and they can tell you based on the demand coming into that destination, competitive homes that are kind of like yours, they can tell you what you should charge. So you're not just basing it on some sensation in your midriff, right? But actually based on data, which is, marketing increasingly, right? As you know, marketing is increasingly, it's 80% data and science and a lot less of kind of creative. And certainly there's very little room for gut feel and instinct when it comes to something like pricing. Now, so that's really exciting in the vacation rental space. And I bring that example up because to me, that's an indicator that this type of technology, which once was only available to, a company like American Airlines, now is available to even the smallest potential supplier in the industry, in the travel industry, an individual homeowner. So certainly this technology, this capability is coming to this sector. But even as a baseline, you don't need a lot of very fancy technology to be able to think about some basic things like, say, charging more for high demand periods versus low. Probably everyone has seasonal pricing. And there are things that companies can think about and experiment with, things like offering, say, a discounts if you have a less flexible cancellation policy, or offering discounts for people who book way in advance as a kind of guaranteed departure, or other types of things that the companies can do. And there are lots of really smart people at some of the different reservation system companies and marketing agencies that have experience with this and should be guiding you. And this, by the way, I'm going to say too, is a kind of a prediction I have about the future, because I think one of the very exciting areas right now in this space is technology, and in particular, a lot of the innovations at reservation system companies we're seeing from, so many of these companies that were at Arival, like Fair Harbor and Peak and Checkfront and Resgo and Resd, and there's Treksoft in Europe, and there's so many others. So these systems today, I think they're commonly known as, reservation systems, and they do things like manage your reservations and track your inventory and your customer profiles, and they do a handoff to a general ledger and so forth. So all of those basic functions to run a business in tours and activities. But the next step, and this also includes attractions, companies like Gateway and others, that the next kind of evolution of these systems is to get smart. So they're not just going to be the business in the box, but then you go run your business. They're also increasingly guiding companies to help with things like pricing and on strategy to help companies make those decisions. And I think some of these companies are beginning to already do this and do it in areas of marketing and website development and website conversion. So I think the future of technology for this sector, as we've seen in others, once the plumbing is there, the plumbing is already there. The next evolution of these companies is now like to get smart and to really help you not just be able to run your business, but to get better and better at running your business.
I think the idea that you mentioned relating to hotels, if you're 100% booked, you're not pricing correctly. I would love to see a case study of a tour company maybe doing that, where they just keep raising their price every weekend until they stop being 100% occupied, and that would just be so fascinating to know what level it gets to where that actually becomes a tipping point.
The one thing that I think is you have to be. I think tour companies need to be a little bit more thoughtful of here, though, is that scenario with the two guys in a seat, and one's paid $200, one's paid $800, because I think airlines are less of a social experience. I think part of being on a tour, it's a very social experience, and so I think the tour companies need to be a little bit more sensitive to that, but there's still lots of opportunities for ways that companies can also use different channels. So, for example, if let's say you work with a third-party tour operator or say a destination pass, then you can actually hide discounted pricing within what's called an opaque channel. So a customer won't know that they've paid, say, X dollars for your tour. They just know they've paid something for a package or a pass. Whereas you can charge full price for that customer that comes up to you and last minute. Very tricky stuff. And there's no one blanket right answer for everybody. You got to apply it to your own business and know your own customers. But it's a really exciting area, I think, to look at.
The next topic is globalization. And we've touched on this already a few times, related to distribution, then also local authenticity and different type of local authenticity related to the people, the population coming in. So let's talk a little bit about how you appeal to that global market as people are coming into your destination. You already talked about distribution a little bit, but how is that world changing? Is the market share of global traffic coming into the United States, has that been increasing dramatically over the last 5 or 10 years? And is that more on the radar, or is it just continuing to capture that traffic that's already been coming in?
So a few things. So first, with the specifics with regard to the U.S., so inbound visitor volume has actually dropped off a bit over the last several years. And I want to make a very important point here too. It's not really so much a political issue, although there's been lots of controversy around some of the positions that the current administration has taken on kind of certain international issues, especially around immigration and also most recently trade. And so there's been lots of speculation about that. There may have been some impact, with some of the positions that have come out of the administration. I think in particular with Mexico, we have seen a drop off in inbound visitor volume from Mexico. But frankly, the biggest issue is simple currency. It's simple economics. And the dollar, we saw coming out of the recession, the dollar really grew pretty consistently for several years. And that is the number one factor for people coming to, or traveling in general, right? How strong is my currency? How far is my dollar going to go? So that's had a little bit of a depressing effect on overall inbound volume. However, the dollar has actually started to soften over the past year and a half. So there's, I think, room for optimism. And the outlook, I think is actually quite good. And I think in general, there's, we are in the middle, in my view, of a very big kind of long-term boom for international travel, especially coming out of markets across Asia, and China is really the biggest driver. But also we've seen this with Europe and Latin America, and in both cases where those regions are coming out of difficult periods from the last global recession from about 7 or 8 years ago. It happened in Latin America and then in Europe a little bit later. But we've now got just this incredible outpouring of travelers from China, which is now the largest outbound market by sheer volume. And what's amazing is these travelers, predominantly younger, millennial, and they are among the most educated, sophisticated, tech-savvy travelers to enter global tourism ever. And so we're seeing lots of shifts that are taking place. So the traditional model for outbound travel was, okay, it's my first trip, I'm going to go with a group tour. And then as a traveler does more and more, and they start to educate themselves more through online kind of shopping and research, they get more comfortable traveling by themselves, and more of these people are comfortable speaking English or have some proficiency in English. So there's just this incredible opportunity to capture these travelers. And so how does a tour operator or an activity provider kind of think about this and begin to try to tackle and take advantage of some of this growth? And there are a few things that I think are just very basic, and we talked about them earlier. So, and one is just, can you support them from a customer service and product standpoint? So let's say if you're in, a key market in, say, California or in Las Vegas, and there's been lots of growth in travelers from China or Japan and Korea. So can you support a tour in their language? Can you provide free Wi-Fi throughout the experience, because they may not have phone service, international phone service where they are, but they are totally, absolutely and totally dependent, kind of connected to their apps and their phones. So you've got to be mobile friendly and facilitate that through the experience. And also just think about how are there ways that you can localize your experience just to make it a bit more, to make travelers feel at home. So I think the best example I can think of is a parallel in the hospitality industry, where a number of hotels in key markets that serve Chinese travelers and Chinese groups is to do things like add a teapot in addition to a coffee maker in the hotel room, or to put things like traditional Chinese kind of breakfast items on the menu, like congee, for example, in colder winter months. So those are some things. And if I think a tour company could look at that maybe for inspiration. So it could be in maybe snacks that might be provided, or refreshments that are provided over the course of a tour, or the things that you do. And I think another thing that's really important, which and it is linked to technology. So and it's one of the things I remember most from Arival last year, was when Eric Nok-Fa from Klook, he's the co-founder and president of Klook, which is an online travel agency based in Hong Kong that's grown very fast in Asia. And he said that, look, if you're a tour company or an attraction and you want to serve Asian travelers, you've got to have something Instagrammable. And I really love that phrase. So you've got to have some little experience or some place, something, or maybe more than one, where your Asian customer can get an amazing selfie of themselves, really captures what they're doing and how awesome they are, and that kind of bragging selfie that they can immediately put on I call it, Insta Face Chat. So whether it's Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, WeChat in China, Line or KakaoTalk, any of these platforms, and they're different in Asia. They're all different in Asia, but you have to facilitate that because that's what is like digital bragging rights. So little things, right? But and all of these groups, all these travelers are very different.
You mentioned that a lot of times they're starting with tour companies when they come and they do their initial traveling. Now, if they're past that, or if they're not going to do a tour company, how is the Asian market finding tours? What websites? How are they booking tours? What's their natural inclination? Their path to purchase?
Well, so it's changing. So I think a lot of travelers in Asian markets continue to book through some of the big travel and tour booking agencies or tour operators in those countries, and continue to be a very big part of the market. And then you've got a number of regional or national companies that really serve a lot of outbound volume from those markets. So, for example, there's a company called Veltra out of Japan, and we actually had one of the leading executives from Veltra at Arival speaking last year. There's Ctrip is the biggest online travel agency in China, and they have a very big activities business and work with a number of companies. They also have some receptive companies in the United States to help them kind of serve those travelers that they send to the United States. I think one of their inbound agencies here is called Tours for Fun, if I recall correctly. And then you have Klook, which is out of Hong Kong. You've got a company called Be My Guest, which is more of a B2B company serving a lot of companies in Asia, but have grown very nicely in that space. So I would definitely look at a company like that. As well. And then you've got online travel agencies throughout Asia that are increasingly a part of the shopping and planning process for travelers. So in India, India, by the way, is one of the fastest growing inbound markets for leisure tourism in the United States. And you've got a segment of the population there that have a rising middle class and growing demand for tourism. And you've got companies like Make My Trip and Clear Trip in India that are doing a lot of outbound volume. So there's no shortage of channels. I think the challenge actually for the typical tour company or attraction provider in any destination is really to understand, okay, who's coming to my city, who's coming to my destination. And again, I go to your DMO. They should know who are the big channel providers into your destination, and that's the place to start.
Great. All right. Well, that brings us to a close, and that was just really insightful when going over the authenticity, the different distribution models, demand-based pricing, globalization. There's just a lot going on, and your insight from a global, high-level perspective, I think, has been really amazing. So thanks for taking the time.
Oh, no, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
And tell our listeners how they find you and find Arival, and how do they connect?
Oh, sure. Well, let's see. We'll definitely come to arivalevent.com, and it's Arival with one R. We're a scrappy startup, didn't have a lot of money for a big URL, but it's a great brand. So it's Arival event.com, and you can learn all about Arival and the things we're doing there and the program, and got some really exciting things going on. Anyone as well is welcome to email me directly. You can reach me at Arival, Douglas@arivalevent.com. You can also, if you're interested in the research side, you can reach me at Phocuswright, Douglas@Phocuswright.com, and that's with a PH, or you can just look up Phocuswright Travel Industry Research, and we have lots of stuff on tours and activities and attractions. And I always, especially, I want to say, our mission at Arival is really to give voice to suppliers and to make sure that we address those concerns and those questions that are most top of mind. So I'm always anxious and hungry to hear from companies that are trying to really create the best part of travel. And so how can we create the best event and help all of you with your business? So any ideas, questions, suggestions, we'd always love to hear it.
Yeah, and I can really vouch for that. I remember last year at Arival when the Airbnb conversation was happening, and the tour operators were standing up and kind of challenging. I forget the speaker's name from Airbnb, but it was a really good forum for that conversation. And it's not just sunshine and rainbows and butterflies at all of the talks. There's real conversation going on, and I thought that was really great and really fascinating. So it was a solid event.
Oh, good. Yeah, thanks. And hats off to Emma at Airbnb. She took a lot of tough questions, and in a lot of cases it's tough. It's like a new business for them, and they're trying in a lot of cases to find the answers, and that's okay. But my appreciation, to her for doing her best, and I think and being a great speaker, and to all of those tour operators that stood up because they're hungry, right? They want to be on Airbnb. They want everyone wants a bigger piece of the pie, and that's why we're all here to try to get it.
Great. All right, well, thank you again, Douglas, and hopefully everyone will see you at Arival this fall.
Sounds good. See you all in Las Vegas in September.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.